everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Say Again with me, Amrita Tripathi. This week, I'm delighted to be in conversation with Vikas Swarup, the former diplomat and best-selling author. Vikas, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Amrita, for having me on your podcast. It's a real pleasure to be in conversation with you.
A huge congratulations on your new book, which we're going to talk about. And I just want to introduce you to some of our listeners and viewers. You've retired as Secretary of the Government of India. You've served as India's High Commissioner to Canada. You were the official spokesperson for the Ministry of External Affairs and held so many important positions, been posted to countries from Turkey to Japan to the UK. And yet, Vikas, it's quite possible that thousands of people have no clue about that side of you because they know you as the author of the phenomenon that was Q&A that went on to become Slumdog Millionaire. That really boggles the mind somehow.
No, but that's true. I mean, that's the nature of the game, that, diplomacy is a very specialized profession. And, many people, they have no clue what a diplomat does, because for many people, the only interface they have with a diplomat is at a lower level when they go to a visa officer, for their visa. They have no clue what goes on inside the walls of a diplomatic premises. Whereas books are one of the ultimate mass mediums. Anybody who reads books, and especially if a book becomes a best-selling film, an Oscar-winning film, then obviously the name recognition is at a different level altogether. So I think that is something I always take in my stride, that if I introduce myself just as Vikas Swarup, the diplomat, they'll say, okay, fine. And if I say I'm Vikas Swarup, the author of Slumdog Millionaire, then can I have your autograph?
And I think I love that. But I do feel like all of your, the diplomatic circles you move in would be aware of the other identity. The best-selling author is a tag. This is, you have come back with The Girl with the Seven Lives, which is there in the background. And we have it, unfortunately, on the Kindle. But for those of you who have had a chance to read it, it's a pacey, best-selling book. And Vikas with Devi, a girl in her mid-20s as a protagonist. Tell us a little bit about this intriguing Why the Seven Lives, and how you said it's an ode to almost resilience of modern India, or a modern Indian woman, in fact.
So in a way, Amrita, you have gone through all three of my previous books as well. And they all are, in a sense, snapshots of India at that particular point in time. So for this particular novel, in a sense, I wanted to return to my roots. Roots as in Q&A, my very first debut novel, which became Slumdog Millionaire. That was also the story of an underdog who emerges as an unlikely winner on a quiz show. This time, of course, there is no quiz, but the stakes are higher. And the only other big difference is that my protagonist in Q&A was 18-year-old Ram Muhammad Thomas. My protagonist in The Girl with the Seven Lives is 25-year-old Devi. So I'm navigating the world. I'm looking at the world through the eyes of a female protagonist, which could be challenging for a male author. But I hope, readers who have read it so far, no one has complained that I could not do a woman's perspective correctly, at least. But it is also a different book from Q&A, in the sense Q&A had a very lovable character. Ram Muhammad Thomas was someone with a very strong moral compass, and you fall in love with him and you follow his journey right till the end. Devi is a much more morally complex character. I mean, she's accused of all types of crimes, including murder. And yet I wanted to paint the picture of a protagonist who is so compelling, despite her obvious flaws, that you still root for her and you still want to find out what happens to her, and you still, want to see how her journey ends.
No, and absolutely, you're right. Because we empathize with her as a reader. You totally empathize with her, despite the sort of morally dubious things that end up happening. There is always a rationale, and somehow, the book also, because without being very preachy, does expose some of the inequities and hypocrisies when we look at the societal framework in India's cities.
Yeah, absolutely. Because see, I call my books not pure thrillers. These are not airport reads. I call my book social thrillers, in the sense they are really written in a thrilling kind of way. You want to turn the page and find out what happens next. There is a hook at the very beginning. But in the process, you also get a peek at some of the issues confronting modern India.
This book has come out 11 years after your last one. Did you need a lot of downtime to get into the nitty-gritties for this one?
No, let me make it very clear. This book did not take 11 years to write. Basically, what happened was I returned from Osaka, Kobe, where I was Consul General of India. That was my last assignment outside India. And then I got so busy with my day job as a diplomat. First, I was Joint Secretary, United Nations Political. Then I became the official spokesperson, in which capacity I traveled on every flight that the foreign minister took out of India, who was Mrs. Sushma Swaraj at that time, and the prime minister took out of India. So I went on almost 40 trips to 40 countries with Prime Minister Modi. And that left me just no time to even think about a book, let alone writing one. Then I was posted as High Commissioner to Canada. And I thought, okay, in Canada, at least I will get my weekends free and I will be able to create something. But I discovered that the Indian community in Canada, and the diaspora is almost 2 million strong, only does stuff on weekends. So whether it is Sonu's birthday, or it is Eid, or Tej, or Holi, or Diwali, or Good Friday, or Easter, everything is celebrated only on weekends. And of course, all of them want the Indian High Commissioner to grace their functions. So all my weekends were also destroyed, so to speak, and I could not write anything. And then 2019, I came back to India as Secretary West in the Ministry of External Affairs, a very high profile position where I was responsible for the entire Europe, entire United Nations, the protocol division, the legal and treaties division, the Central Asia division. They were all under me. And then the pandemic happened. And even though work had decreased quite a bit during the pandemic, as it had for all of us, but yet I could not write during that time because there was so much distress happening all around us. People were dying, friends were in all kinds of difficulties. We were all searching for hospital rooms and things like that. So again, there was no possibility of writing anything then. And 2021, I retired from the Indian Foreign Service. 2021 on the 30th of June. And that was again a time of transition. I was transitioning from a government service to a private citizen. I was transitioning from a government accommodation to a private accommodation. So I think it took some time for all those transitions to sort of die out, for me to feel more settled. And that's really when I started creating this new book. So the writing of it, I think, took about a year and a half, which is what normally my previous 3 books have done. The first one, I got very lucky. I wrote it in just 2.5 months.
I'm going to ask you about that first book, which is where you sort of blazed onto everyone's really the pop culture reference point. But I do want to talk to you a little bit about your career as a diplomat. At your book launch, which again was very much a rock star kind of moment, I feel, because it was a packed book launch, in the heart of the capital a few weeks ago. You did say somewhere that you never really felt tempted to quit your day job, no matter how much success you've seen as a writer. Can you expand on that a little bit for us and what that means to you to have both of these very strong strands of your identity?
Yes, you see, one of the reasons I was able to write so freely and do and write what I wanted to write was because I had the security of the day job. I knew that my bread and butter is coming from the government of India, and Indian diplomats are paid reasonably well. So my family would not be in dire straits if my career as a writer failed to take off. And that is why when Slumdog Millionaire became a huge hit and I was getting all these offers that why don't you quit your day job and look at the opportunity cost, you can start creating a novel every year and probably make much more money. I said, but that kind of success is very fickle. Today, my first book has done very well, but maybe the second book, drops without a trace and is a complete disaster. And that's the end of my writing career. But whereas as a diplomat, not only do I get to have a good standard of living, but more importantly, I get to represent India. And flying the flag of India on your official car, speaking from a podium at the United Nations Security Council with a placard which says India, and speaking about India as the Indian representative. I think that gives you a high which no success of the book or a film can match. So from that point of view, I did not entertain these offers for even 10 seconds because I was convinced I could only be a writer if I was in the security of the day job. And that day job continued, of course, till 2021. One of the, of course, downsides of that was that I could not create any more books because for me, the work came first. But I have no regrets. As I said, I thoroughly enjoyed being a diplomat and representing India. And then, of course, gracefully retiring once my innings was over, because when you hit 60, that's the end of your career in government. And then I transitioned to being a private individual. And then, of course, I found the time and the space to start working on a new novel. And this time, of course, it was very exhilarating because whenever as a diplomat I was writing, and I was essentially a weekend writer, even on weekends, sometimes you have to go to a diplomatic reception or a dinner or whatever, and your chain of thought is always interrupted. Whereas this time I had those clear horizons. It did not matter whether it is Monday or Sunday or Tuesday, because every day, as far as I was concerned, was a weekend.
And every day is like a writing day then, because you could carve out that time undisturbed.
Exactly.
I do want to say, your writing is also so contemporary, Vikas. There's a lot of swearing in this, by the way. It's very real, it's very modern, it's very pacey, not like your, I suppose, diplomatic communiques and files and so on. So there is a sort of a liberating of your time, your schedule. But of course, as you said, you wouldn't trade, the career you've had for anything else. I do want to take us all back to when you were working on Q&A. You were posted in London at the time. And I know from one of the things from, our earlier conversations, even though Slumdog Millionaire has been such a huge success, I know Slumdog wasn't your ideal choice of word for the title, but that's many years ago now.
My title was Q&A.
Yeah. For the movie, can you tell us a little bit about how the book became the movie, and then we'll talk about the Oscars. And you're probably the first Indian diplomat to even be at the Oscars, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Maybe the Consul General in San Francisco probably has been invited. I don't know. I do not know, but I would assume that, if he's a good Consul General, then he would get an invite to the Academy Awards. But anyway, my writing journey started really, as you said, in London. And it was, I think, because I was in London that I was able to create this first novel. It was just the sheer coincidence of being in London, such a hub for the world of English language publishing. All the agents, all the publishers, the big publishers are all located in London. So I think it acted as an inspiration for me, the city of London itself. And the second inspiration was some of my contemporaries in the Indian Foreign Service who were trying their hand at fiction. As I mentioned at the book launch, Humphrey Hawksley, the celebrated BBC journalist, told me once that he has yet to meet an Indian Foreign Service officer who is not in search of a publisher. I mean, in the sense, so many Indian diplomats have written books, not just novels, but also, travelogues, memoirs, and the nitty-gritty of geopolitics and diplomacy, that it's not funny. And one of the reasons I think for the fluency that Indian diplomats have in creating books is that books, writers and diplomats both trade in words. I mean, that is our main currency. And if you are fluent with words, if you know the value of words, if you know the weight of words, then if you want to write something beyond your, political dispatches, then I suppose it comes in handy. So anyway, inspired by my contemporaries in the Foreign Service and the City of London, I penned down this novel in 2.5 months when I was all alone. Aparna, my wife, and our 2 sons had already gone back to India because the school session had started. I was also posted back to Delhi, but then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee decided to visit London in September. So I was detained to look after the visit because I was a political counselor. So it was in those 2.5 months where I was all alone that I conceptualized, created, and printed out the novel called Q&A. Of course, when I wrote it, I had no expectation of success at all. In fact, when that novel went to the publishers, they liked it and they said, this looks like a big book. So I finished this novel in 2003, but the publishers said, we will only publish it in 2005 because all our big books are already lined up. So I said, no problem, I'll wait. As a first-time author, what choice do you have? And then I get a call from Film 4 in 2004, 1 year before the book has even been published, that we want to make a movie based on your novel. So my first question to Tessa Ross, who called me, was, how do you even know I've written a novel because it's not even been published? And she said, no, your publisher tipped us off and we love the manuscript. We think it has a lot of cinematic potential. So, if you don't mind, please give us the rights. And of course, I gladly gave the rights. They were taking a huge punt on the book. They were taking a risk with the book because they had no idea whether this book will sell even 1 copy or not. So they took a huge chance. Of course, the advantage they had was that they could sign me up, when the book had not even been launched. So I could not really negotiate in any big deal. But to me, that was not important. What was important is that the film did get made. It did become a huge, huge phenomena, winning 8 Oscars and 72 other awards. And most importantly, I think it allowed my story to reach a much wider audience.
Yeah, so many languages, the translations. I think the
47 at last count.
That's
the last
insane.
one was Uzbek.
Yeah. And, obviously that's not something you set out when you were planning to write the book, but tell us a little bit about, some of the reactions that have stayed with you. What's been the most memorable thing about that journey? And of course,
Yes.
if you could share some of your Oscar moments with us, that would be fantastic.
So in terms of, memorable moments, the first memorable moment came at my first book tour. My very first book tour took me to Singapore and then to Australia, to all the major cities of Australia, Canberra, Melbourne, Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane, and then to Auckland for the Auckland Writers Festival. And at one of my very first interactions, an aged lady walked up to me and said, Mr. Swarup, your book gave us such a great window into the culture and society of India. And I was rather surprised when she told me this, because when I was writing this book, I had no knowledge or no idea that this would give somebody a peek into Indian society and culture, because I was writing as an insider for insiders, as an Indian for Indians. I had no idea that this book would be appreciated by somebody in Australia or Mexico or Japan or or even Argentina. So that has come as a huge surprise to me, but I'm very gratified that this book, in a sense, became a global book in 47 translations now. And, musicals have been made on this book even as far as Japan. So that was the first memorable moment. But the really memorable moment came when I was posted in South Africa. And it was the launch of my second novel, Six Suspects. And a young South African lady, girl rather, I would say, came up to me and she said, and she showed me a very well-thumbed copy of Q&A, even though it was, that event was to promote my new book, but she came with the copy of my first book. And she said, Mr. Swarup, will you please sign this for me? And I said, of course, with great pleasure. And I saw it was very well thumbed. There was a lot of scribblings and, a lot of places she had underlined, etc. And as I was signing it, she just said, do you have any idea what this book means to me? And I said, no, obviously not. Please tell me. And then she said, at one time I was going through a very dark phase in my life. And the phase was so dark that I had even decided that life was not worth living. But then I read your book again. And it was Ram Muhammad Thomas, your hero, who gave me the strength to carry on. So, that was really, really, what should I say? It was a very critical moment for me because, I never imagined that the power of words could be so high that it could even inspire somebody to carry on living. And that told me that words are precious. That even though you might write thinking, they are just ordinary words, but for your readers, they may be extraordinary words and they may lead to extraordinary things. So that really told me that, writing is something that you have to take very, very seriously, because for the readers, it is just not a pastime. It could be something path defining as well.
It's quite a responsibility, when you look at it that way, what your writing can mean to someone. That's very moving, Vikas. I do want to ask you, on this podcast, we do talk to high achievers, leaders from all walks of life, a little bit about, what's going on behind the scenes. So I do want to ask you, in terms of success, you've seen great success. You've also had to have so much fortitude and perseverance, to do a full career in the IFS as well. What does success actually mean to you? How do you quantify it? And I'm going to follow that up with, how do you look at setbacks and how do you deal with setbacks? Because, your writing does show that resilience is an important quality as well.
So success, of course, I think there are many parameters of success. These days, people think that you are a success because you have made money or you have, 10 million followers on Twitter and things like that. I don't really look at success. I think for me, success is what you want to do, achieve in life, and have you achieved what you set out to do. If you feel that, yes, you achieved what you wanted to achieve, then you are a success. If you objectively feel that you were not able to achieve what you set out to achieve, then I think it was a failure. So for me, success is a very personal thing. And the problem is we have outsourced success to, outsiders, that they determine whether you are successful or not. And I think when you make your point of reference outside yourself, then you are setting yourself up for failure. Because at the end of the day, you cannot satisfy everyone. But as long as your conscience is clear, as long as you are confident that, you achieved what you wanted to achieve, and that whatever milestones you wanted to cross, you have crossed those, then I think that, for me, that's the definition of success. And of course, failure is, when you are not able to achieve those milestones that you set out to do, and then you have to do better. And that's why it's important that, you pull yourself by your bootstraps. So for me, the guiding mantra of my life is, this too shall pass. If you are at the height of success, remember that this too shall pass. The cameras will not be trained on your face all the time. You may once again go into the obscurity of darkness, but then that too shall pass, and then the light will come back on again. Similarly, when you are down in the dumps, if you think this too shall pass, then that will give you the courage and the confidence and the hope to overcome that adversity and start all over again.
And is that something that you've been able to put into practice yourself? Just remembering that.
Well, in the sense, I have not really had that many setbacks, so to speak, because you see, I was never that type of a diplomat that I have to aspire, I want to get this particular position. There's sometimes people get set on, I want to be ambassador to Washington only, or I want to be a political counselor in Edinburgh, or whatever it is. I was never that type of. I was comfortable in whatever I was getting, as long as it was fair recompense for the efforts I had put in, and it should not be that I have done really good jobs, a good job, and then I'm being sent to a very obscure posting where I will not be able to really achieve my full potential, because the canvas would be so much narrower there. So to that extent, I do not think I have really had to endure any setbacks in my career. Yes, I think joining the foreign service itself was a huge challenge, because in that time, I joined in 1986. Only 12 people used to be taken into the foreign service. Only 12. And at that time, about 200,000, 2 lakh people used to sit for that examination. So just to make the cut and to get into the foreign service gave you a huge high, that you were found good enough to sit with the elite of India and to be a part of the elite services. So that was good. And then, as I said, I had a fairly comfortable career. I was posted in 4 continents. I did 2 postings in Africa, 2 postings in North America, Canada, and the United States, 2 postings in Asia, Turkey, and Japan. So from that point of view, I think I had a reasonably good career, a good trajectory. I held some very important positions, being the official spokesperson of the ministry. That is a huge, huge responsibility, because you are the one who sits in front of the camera, who speaks to the media. Nobody else is even authorized. And you are supposed to know everything, because, even the foreign secretary looks after certain designated areas, because you have Secretary East and Secretary West who look after other areas. But the official spokesman has to know everything. He has to have a 360-degree view, because he can be asked any question under the sun. And a good spokesman can take a pass on 1, maximum 2 questions that I'll get back to you later. If you take a pass on more than 2 questions, you're not a good spokesman. And I always try to ensure that I don't have to take a pass even on a single question.
I love it. So I was not covering foreign affairs when you were the spokesperson, but since I have you in the hot seat, I do want to ask you something that it's just because you mentioned some of your postings. Let me frame this as a more hypothetical. When you see headlines, right, and these are for postings you've held in the past, and I'll give an example. Of course, India Canada has been in the headlines a lot. When you see headlines and journalists reporting on how ties are at an all-time low, things are going so wrong. As a former diplomat, what can you tell us about, like, as a reality check? Of course, it's quite possible that ties are strained because of certain things we've been reading about. But when you read those headlines, what do you think?
Yes, so see, the problem is media is only focused on the sensationalist headlines. And for them, if things are going well and things are going normally as they should be, then there is no headline at all. There is nothing to report, because it is business as usual. Only when things don't go well, that is when it becomes news. And that is why, if you look at the media coverage on India's geopolitical evolution or India's geopolitical thinking, they will only focus on those areas where they think Indian diplomacy has not achieved the desired results and things like that. The reality is slightly more complex. This is not to deny that there have been problems in the India-Canada relationship, and I think there are 2 issues on which this relationship has been derailed in the past as well. The first issue is the nuclear issue. So when India tested its peaceful nuclear explosion, 1974, then Canada reacted very negatively, because they were the first country that gave us nuclear technology, and they felt betrayed that we have used it to develop a nuclear device, a nuclear fission device. And then secondly, of course, in 1998, when we actually tested 5 nuclear bombs, then also Canada reacted very negatively. Relations went into a deep freeze till they were taken out of the deep freeze, and normal commerce and interaction could continue. And we reached full circle in 2015 during Prime Minister Modi's path-breaking visit to Canada. I think it was the first bilateral visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Canada in 41 years. And there we signed a nuclear agreement where Canada agreed to supply uranium to India. So imagine, from a time when Canada felt betrayed and said we should never have given you uranium, you made bombs from that, to a time when Canada felt confident enough that India will use this nuclear fuel only for peaceful purposes, for those reactors which are under IAEA safeguards. I think was a huge leap of faith and showed so much trust in the relationship. The second issue on which relations have been derailed has been, of course, the Khalistan issue. And I think the most visible and the most horrific reminder of that was, of course, Air India Kanishka flight, which, as you know, was blown up mid-air, and I think 329 passengers, most of them Canadian citizens of Indian descent, lost their lives. And the inquiry into it was a very botched inquiry. I think that inquiry is still continuing. And then more recently, again, I think when the farmers' agitation happened in India, there were certain comments by the Canadian leadership And now, of course, to the final phase where Canada is accusing India of masterminding the murder of a Canadian on Canadian soil. So I think there are these issues which have to be resolved. There is no doubt about it. But at the same time, I think Canada also will have to take a hard look at its diaspora politics and whether it is doing more harm than good. But to say that India-Canada relations are now over, nothing is possible, I think is also a misnomer. Behind the scenes, dialogue and discussion always continues. And diplomacy is always about finding solutions to intractable issues. That's really the essence of diplomacy. When diplomacy ends, that's when war begins.
And that's when you really worry, and that's another bigger conversation about what's going on globally. Thank you so much. I appreciate your fielding that question with a straight bat. Let me come back to the writing, and I do want to ask you, Vikas. Now you have 4 novels out, and I'm sure you're going to be writing more. Have you ever felt that after that huge success of Q&A and then Slumdog Millionaire and walking the red carpet at the Oscars and so on and so forth, did you feel a lot of pressure after that to live up to that level of success, or were you able to be like, look, that might be a once in a lifetime kind of thing?
Amrita, try and dig up. In fact, maybe you could show it to your viewers in the post-production. Dig up the picture of Slumdog Millionaire being awarded the Best Picture, which is always the last Oscar. As you know, Steven Spielberg came onto the stage and he opened the envelope and he declared Slumdog Millionaire is the winner of the best film of 2008. And look at the number of people on the stage receiving that award. If you count, there are about 25 people, including me. And all of them are looking straight at the camera. There's only one guy in a black bangala who's looking up at the ceiling, and that's me. And actually, I'm wondering, what is a professional diplomat doing at the Kodak Theatre standing at the Oscar stage? So that was really the feeling going through my mind, that what is happening here? How the hell could I have landed up at the world's greatest entertainment stage? And it was really a surreal experience from that point of view. But look, that success did not go to my head or anything like that. As I told you earlier, that I was very focused that, look, this is just something which I pursue as a passion. It has achieved an amazing, phenomenal result. But that does not mean that my second book would also be as good as my first book. In fact, this is called the second book syndrome. When your first book becomes an Oscar-winning film, then obviously the pressure on the second book is that much more. And there are many authors who are called one-book wonders because, their first book did so well that the pressure of that became so immense that they just could not create the second book because they always felt that they would not be up to the task of matching the success of the first book. But for me, because as I said, I had the security of the day job, I was not worried about success and failure. And I set out to write 6 Suspects, which I knew was not going to be as successful as Q&A, even when I wrote the first page, because this was a much more complex book. But I wanted to test my own boundaries as a writer. Can I write a polyphonic narrative with 6 different characters who are all speaking to you in their own voices and explore 6 different strata of society? So that's why I wrote 6 Suspects, and I'm glad that it has also resonated with readers. It transitioned not, of course, into an Oscar-winning film, but into a web series called The Great Indian Murder, which is available on Disney and Hulu.
That's incredible. So for the Girl with the 7 Lives, are you already in conversation? I was reading so much. I'd love to hear from you who you want to play Devi if there was an adaptation.
Yes, so already I think the Netflix people, not Netflix itself, but people who work with Netflix, they are chasing me every day when I open my email inbox. There are at least 2 or 3, feelers that Mr. Swarup, we have just come across your new book. We think this is excellent material for a film or a web series. Would you be available to giving us the rights and things like that? And I'm being very cagey at this point in time. The book has just come out. It just came out on the 15th of July. So I think let it have a wider release, let more and more people get into the story. And then I'll evaluate the offers that come, because I'm not in a hurry that, okay, the book came out this month and next month the serial or the web series or the film has to begin. Sometimes books take their own time. The film takes its own time to come out. But you asked me the question of who I would like to play the lead protagonist, that is Devi in my book. So of the current crop of heroines, actresses rather, in India, I think one of the most versatile is Alia Bhatt. But I'm not talking about the glamorous Alia Bhatt, of recent films. I think I'm looking more at the de-glam version of Alia as an Urta Punjab, where I think she did the de-glam girl very, very well. And Devi, I think, would be that kind of a protagonist. Of course, you would need 3 different, actors to portray her life story, because her life begins, when she is 12 2 years old or something like that and continues till she's 25. So maybe you will have a child actor playing the child Devi, then you'll have a teenage actor playing the teenage Devi, and then you'll have Alia Bhatt or whoever playing the woman. But it'll be an interesting character to explore.
And of course, this time, unlike the first one, you have a lot of room to negotiate because there's been so many different kinds of.
I have also learned now from my past experiences. So that's why I said I'm in no hurry. But look, as long as somebody approaches me with a lot of, a lot of love and respect for the original work and a director that I'm comfortable with, I'll be more than happy to see it transition, because eventually the ultimate mass medium is cinema. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. And you also, you had that respect you've spoken about with Q&A, Danny Boyle and the team doing the adaptations. Just a few more questions for you, Vikas, but I do have to ask you, please tell us that story you shared at the launch, which I heard for the first time, involves name-dropping Jennifer Aniston, who was maybe one of the most famous people at the time. Tell us that story, and then I have a few more questions for you.
Yes. So, when I was invited to the Oscars, the Oscar invitation comes with a huge do's and don'ts list. Please do not bring a recording device. Please do not bring a camera. Please do not do this. Please do not come dressed in, night clothes and things like that. So it comes with a lot of responsibility, in the sense, because it is the ultimate entertainment event for the Hollywood film industry. So I just went with my book. I did not go with even my cell phone. I did not go with any camera. I just went with a copy of my book, because this was the only time, I think, where the entire cast and crew were going to be together. As Danny Boyle said, this is our last party together. So I wanted to get everybody's autograph on that book. And what I liked about the Oscars is, of course, there's very tight security and everything. And there is a caste system when you walk in, because, the red carpet, only the film stars are supposed to walk on the red carpet. The rest of us, the hoi polloi, are supposed to walk on the side, and not really on the red carpet, but maybe on a gray carpet or something, which is on the side, which is not in the line of sight of the cameraman. But once you cross that red carpet, the Oscars are totally democratic. In the sense, once you have crossed the red carpet, there are no security guys at all. And I met everyone. I met Brad Pitt, I met Angelina Jolie, I met Meryl Streep, I met Will Smith, I met Valentino, the fashion designer. In fact, right next to me, Prince was sitting, the famous musician. But, somehow in my mind, I had heard that he is now a glyph, in the sense that he's known as the artist formerly known as the Prince. And I just kept thinking, how do I address him? Because he's not Prince, he's the artist formerly known as Prince. And in that hesitation, I just completely, I lost my tongue, and I did not really introduce myself and have a conversation with him. And he died, as you know, a few years later. So that was the great thing about the Oscars. In India, I suppose a top superstar, Salman Khan or a Shah Rukh Khan, their bodyguards will probably never allow you within 10 feet of them. But in the Oscars, as I said, there are no bodyguards. Brad Pitt is a guest. You are also a guest. And you can mingle with whoever you want, because the Oscars happen exactly like you see it on screen. There is 10 minutes of ceremony, and 10 minutes when the advertisements are played on TV. Nothing is happening at the Oscars. So people are going either to the bar to get a drink, or they are networking, or they're going to the toilet. And that's really when the real networking at the Oscars happens. So anyway, I was at the Oscars. They showed my cutout at least 3 or 4 times, because that evening Slumdog won 8 Oscars. So every time the Oscar was being won, the camera will focus on the 3 of us sitting together. That was me, Irfan Khan, and Anil Kapoor. We were in E22, 23, E24. That's where we were sitting, just 5 rows from the center stage. But once the Oscar ends, then it is complete bedlam, because the ceremony has ended. And remember, in the films also, when you go into the theater, you enter through a very nice entrance, right? Because your ticket has just started now. But when you finish the film and your ticket has ended, they take you out through a patli gali, So the same thing at the Oscars. The Oscars ended, security guards are gone, nobody is bothered about you anymore. Just find your way out, get into your car and go away. So I had, this was the very first time I was in such a setting, and I probably took a wrong turn. And instead of going towards the exit, I entered a makeup room, and it turned out to be Jennifer Aniston's makeup room. And there was only Jennifer Aniston, and I suppose her former boyfriend at that time, John Mayer, who I did not know at all who he was. She was in the room. She looked at me. I was in a black bandgala, and I was holding my book, Slumdog Millionaire, in my hand. And she looked at me and she said, "So you are the man?" And I said, "Yes, I'm the man." And then we had believe it or not, we had a 10-minute conversation about India, and she said how much she loves India and how much she wants to visit India, and yoga and all those things. And after 10 minutes, she said, "Okay, I have to go now. Why don't you come with me?" So I said, "Okay, absolutely. Jennifer Aniston is asking me to come with her. I'll go with her." So we go down a flight of steps into a VIP parking lot. And there was an attendant there, and Jennifer tells the attendant that, "Can you call my car?" And she says, "Of course, Miss Aniston." And he speaks into his mic, "Please bring Miss Aniston's car." And 30 seconds later, a sleek stretch limousine arrives, and Jennifer Aniston and John Mayer get into the car. And Jennifer tells me, "Okay, I'm leaving, but enjoy the rest of your time in Los Angeles." And she's off. So I turned to this parking attendant and I said, "Can you bring my car now?" And he looks at me and he says, "Who the hell are you, sir?" So that is when I came crashing down to reality, to my position as a person of no importance at the Oscars, and I had to go all the way back to the real parking lot and find my own car and then get into it. But it was an exciting experience, no doubt about it.
I love that. It's such a magical moment as well, and then coming back down to,
No,
to
absolutely.
reality.
And the next day, a friend of mine who knew that I was in town, he took me to Spago, the very famous restaurant, run by a very famous celebrity chef. And there, I met 3 or 4 people. I met Rob Reiner, the director, and Rob Reiner said, "Your book." He had read my book. He said, "Your book was like a fairy tale, and we wanted your film to have a fairy tale ending." So I voted for Slumdog Millionaire. And I met Sidney Poitier. And this guy who was with me, he said, "Do you want to meet Sidney Poitier?" I said, "Of course I want to meet Sidney Poitier, but why would Sidney Poitier want to meet me? I mean, he doesn't know me from Adam." He says, "You just hold on." And he walks up to him. He's very confident, this guy. He was an entertainment lawyer in Los Angeles. He walks up to Sidney Poitier and he says, "I have the author of Slumdog Millionaire with me. Would you want to meet him?" And Sidney Poitier said, "Yes, of course, I would love to meet him." And I had a 10-minute conversation with Sidney Poitier, who told me that he does not go to the Oscars anymore because they gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award. And he's a writer like me now. And he churns out novels. So as I said, I think the sheer respect that Slumdog Millionaire engendered for talent from India, I think that to me was the most gratifying thing. That for the first time, because till then, Indian films were seen as, these are Bollywood films, which are in their own little universe, and they appeal to a very limited section of the Americans, the Indian diaspora and things like that. Slumdog Millionaire was the first Indian film. Well, it was technically directed by a Britisher, but I call it an Indian film because it was an Indian story with Indian actors and Indian musicians, Indian technicians. So it was a very Indian film, which made waves globally and was truly accepted by the West as a fantastic cross-cultural import.
It's incredible. So many experiences packed into that, and into the last 4 books as well. I'm going to hope that everyone who's listening to this or watching this does pick up your latest, The Girl with the 7 Lives. And I'm going to wind down with a couple of questions for you, Vikas. Wind down this interview for now. Of course, we have to do another one with your next book or when the movie or film series is announced. I want to ask you if you can guess who this is. I'm going to read you a quote. "The one thing that I discovered and love about Vikas the writer is that he plots with his brain and writes with his heart. Great authors like Premchand and Manto have written such heart-wrenching stories which were reactions to and reflections on society, all from the heart. Yes, I am his biggest fan and cheerleader." This might give it away. "Yes, I am his biggest fan and cheerleader, for I've seen him give his all to whatever he's working on. Brilliant, witty, sharp, honest, committed. All ingredients that one would fall for." Can you guess?
I think this is the kind of stuff only my wife Aparna could have written.
I asked Aparna to send me a message for you and a quote about what she loves about you as a writer that maybe all of us don't know.
No,
And
look,
also,
I'm the most fortunate husband in the world to have a wife like Aparna. I mean, who is absolutely devoted to everything that she does, and and she's my biggest cheerleader. So I couldn't have written
yeah,
any of those novels without having Aparna as at my side. And this one in particular, because I was trying to enter the mind of a woman.
yeah.
So Veer Sangmi asked me the other day that what kind of a practice did you do to write this novel? I said, married to Aparna for 35 years is practice enough to understand the psyche of a woman.
I love
But,
that. And I did
she
ask
was my
her.
touchstone. She was my touchstone whenever I had any doubts that, how would she react? How would Devi react in this situation? Aparna would clear up my doubts.
I love that, and because it's such a strong character, and like you said, it is a woman protagonist. I did ask her as well. Is it fair to say you're his biggest fan and cheerleader? And she owns it. She's like, yes, 100%. This is why. So I'm going to wind down this interview on that note by asking you one final thing, Vikas. What are 1 or 2 things that you're grateful for?
No, I'm grateful for a lot of things. COVID, for instance, During COVID, Aparna was hospitalized for 12 days on oxygen support. And, that really showed us how ephemeral life is, how transient life can be. So we are grateful just to be alive, and to have passed that very dark phase of COVID and the Delta wave. So I think I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the gift of family, to have a very supportive wife, to have two lovely sons, Aditya and Varun, who are also my biggest cheerleaders, but also my biggest and fiercest critics, and they are the ones who keep me grounded. That look, don't start flying high. We'll bring you down to earth because we believe this was scrap writing or whatever and things like that. I mean, they are brutal in their assessment, and that's good. So I'm grateful for that, and of course I'm grateful for the little pleasures and joys that we get from everyday life. From hearing birds chirp in the morning, having a peacock, flutter its wings and sing in front of us, and meeting ordinary people, hearing their tales. I think life is full of little joys and pleasures if you seek them out. If you don't, and you are comfortable in your own bubble and you don't seek out anything, then that's also a form of living. But I think to live really well, you have to focus on the quality of life. Not the quantity of life, but the quality of life. And I think quality of life really comes from music, friends, laughter, travel, adventure, exploration, and contemplation.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful. And with that, we'll have to wind down this episode of Say Again. Vikas, huge gratitude to you. More power to your pen. And I'm excited to see what's next for you as well.
Thank you so much, Amrita. It's always a pleasure speaking to you. And more power to your, to your voice. May you garner millions and millions of viewers and listeners, and maybe have a subsequent conversation when Alia Bhatt agrees to star in The Girl with the Seven Lives.
I need to tag Alia Bhatt on this and then remind you of this moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you.